Hello, I'm Dave and this is Logan, out once again for a walk in the New Forest. Thanks for joining us. Now today we're at Longcross Plain, which is just to the west of Cadnam and east of Fritham in the sort of northern part of the New Forest. And we're going to be walking a roughly 4 or 5 mile route around 3 woodland enclosures, the Coppice of Linwood, the Salisbury Trench and King's Garn Gutter. Now I'm filming at the end of November. The sun is out, a fair bit of blue sky, a glorious late autumnal day, but very cold. That's why we're well wrapped up. Should be perfect conditions for walking though. Do come along with us. Well, I parked my car at the Forestry England car park at Longcross. Before we head into the forest, let me just show you a little bit of the area here. You can probably see Longcross Pond that's just behind me. And it really is a beautiful part of the forest. The pond, say in front of me, very popular with ponies and cattle because it tends not to dry out in the summer. But just looking across there, you can see a road on the right. That's the busy B3078 road that goes from Cadnam to Fordingbridge, also known as Roger Penny Way. And we're quite high up here. In fact, the highest point in the New Forest is Piper's Weight, which is, I don't know, half a mile in that direction. And then just panning across, you can see a trig point over there in the middle of the plain. We have bagged that one about 2 years ago, so we won't do that again. Well, I've just come off Longcross Plain and just about to head into my first bit of woodland for the walk, the Coppice of Linwood. Hopefully we're going to get to see some terrific autumnal colours. I'm basically going to be following a cycle track initially, and just by the entrance there's a lovely old cottage, a keeper's cottage that was built in 1895. It doesn't actually show on an 1895 map, but does show on an 1897 map. And then a couple more houses were built by the Forestry Commission in 1957, presumably originally for forest workers. Well, it certainly is a lovely time of year to be exploring through woodland. Now, the Coppice of Linwood was enclosed in 1775 with oak and beech, and there's a fine example in front of me here. It was thrown out, i.e. the fencing was removed from the enclosure banks in 1829, and then conifers added in the 1920s, and it covers something like 247 acres. Well, one of the great things about this walk today is that although we're keeping to a forestry track, from time to time we can pop off into the woodland either side to explore. Just found a lovely bit of open area, perfect for some Whippet zoomies. Cue the music. Well, it really is a beautiful sight. There are just about enough leaves left on the trees for a display. And of course you've got the mixture of those lighter yellows and golds mixed with the evergreen of the holly behind. Quite stunning. Well, the first of a couple of streams that we're going to come across early in the walk, with the water flowing off the high ground at Longcross down into the valley. And even up here, the stream certainly creates quite a big sort of gully. Just shows how much erosion can take place even high up near the plain. Well, a little bit more of the stream. You can see it goes underneath the cycle track there and continues to head down into the valley. And I think up here it's known as Three Waters Gutter, I'm not sure, but it eventually leads to King's Garn Gutter, which then joins up with Colmere Gutter at Blackthorn Gutter to the southeast, and then it eventually joins the Cadnam River and then the River Blackwater and then eventually the River Test and finally out to sea at Southampton Water. But as you can see, later on in the winter this can become quite a raging torrent. You can see how deep the sides of the bank are. They're, what, 10 metres at least, I reckon. But, I love the sound of the little waterfalls that develop after heavy rain. Well folks, as we're walking through this quite beautiful and peaceful bit of woodland, I thought I'd read a few extracts from a book called Walking in the New Forest by Joan Begbie. Now Joan wrote the book in 1934. She lived in the area. I think she died in 1984. And basically the book itself records a number of walks she did in the New Forest with her two dogs, Mr. Bundy, a rough-haired griffon, and Bill, a bull terrier. So I hope you don't mind if I read a few extracts. Joan used to call it Linwood Copse. We crossed the moor road just opposite Fritham House and were soon under the beeches, oaks and hollies that make the threshold of Linwood Copse so spacious and so pleasant. The trees are so tall that birds' voices gain in their branches the echoing clarity a boy's treble takes itself in an empty cathedral choir. Beeches must have a sense of humour. They spread their silver branches so peacefully against their brilliant, transparent leafage that you cannot choose but gaze upwards as you walk. Then, through the brown leaves of many autumns lying deep on the ground below them, they thrust their roots and curves exactly calculated to fit the human toe. I mean, she's got a terrific way of writing, hasn't she? I love this book. Well, just before I leave the Coppice of Linwood, shall we have another reading from Joan's book? The beeches and oaks share the honours here, sometimes coming in groups, but for the most part mingling indiscriminately. They have none of the dignity of the beeches outside the enclosure, growing to no great height, being scraggly branched when oaks and stumpily stemmed when beeches. The wood has an unkept air, and its undergrowth is a wild tangle of rank grass and bramble, with a curiously deserted look about it, as though no little beasts made their homes among it. But if the underscrub is without friends, the trees have green lovers in plenty. Ivy sends delicate sprays darting up their trunks. Moss wraps itself about root and branch, and ferns grow profusely on the sunward curve of those tree trunks which, either from some infirmity due to age or some handicap in youth, have not been able to hold up their heads. Well, I've just come out of the Coppice of Linwood Inclosure. Now, just to the southeast of that enclosure is a tiny little bit of woodland called Gibbet Wood, and it's just behind me here. And it certainly shows on some very old maps. The name suggests that there probably was a gibbet once here. And I was reading a story that, well, there was a chap called John Lewhite of Bramshaw who committed a felony of some sort and was hanged, possibly here. And he may have owned the land here, and it would have passed to the king and was given over to William de St Omer. I think that's how you pronounce his name. He owned a fair bit of land around here anyway, and he paid some cash to the king. I think it was Edward III, so that must have been, what, the 14th century? Now, the other reason I wanted to stop by here is that, well, it's famous for an insect called the New Forest cicada. No, I'd never heard of it either. Now, apparently at one stage this was a really popular area for the insect. And I was reading that it spends 7 or 8 years underground as a nymph before the adults emerge and are active for 2 to 4 weeks in May and July. And in the last spring before they emerge, they build a turret-like structure in the soil before the males fly up into trees and sing to attract a mate, but only on warm or sunny days. Apparently the insect's 3 centimetres long with clear wings and a stripe on the body. And it's the only species of cicada native to England, and I think it's only ever been found here. Well, the first record of a cicada in the New Forest was in 1812, but they seem to disappear around about 1941, only to reappear again around about 1961, 1962, but none have been seen since the 1990s. Have they gone forever? Or is it just part of a cycle? Who knows? David Attenborough did a really super video about a slightly different species of cicada. I'll put the details below. Do check it out. It's a fascinating insect. So they may not have been seen for 30 years, but they may still be here somewhere. Well, just between the Coppice of Linwood Inclosure and the King's Garn Gutter Enclosure is this little bit of open land, and you can see in front of me a pony pound, and regular viewers will have seen these in the past, quite a few dotted around the forest, and they're used, well, primarily during the New Forest pony drift in September, October time, but also other times of the year as well. And basically the ponies will be corralled down into this area, and then they can be checked over health-wise and have their reflective collars put on for the winter, and any young stock taken off and what have you. This one's quite a large one actually. I tell you, it really is quite glorious now. Well, a little update on the route. So we've come out of the Coppice of Linwood, and there's Gibbet Wood over to my left, and we're just about to go into our next enclosure, King's Garn Gutter, before we turn round and go back through the Salisbury Trench enclosure. I don't know too much about King's Garn Gutter. I don't think it appears on one of the old 1814 driver's map. I think it's something like Prior's Acre instead. Now, I know I've probably mentioned this before in New Forest walk videos, but I'll mention it again anyway. This is a typical New Forest enclosure bank with a ditch on one side, and when the enclosure was established there would have been a wooden fence on top to keep livestock out, and then after about 30 years or so, once the trees that had been planted inside the enclosure were big enough to look after themselves, the fencing was removed and the livestock could go back into the enclosure and start grazing underneath the trees. Oh, look at those bright red holly berries glinting in the golden autumnal sunshine. It will soon be Christmas. Well, I'm now in my final wooded enclosure of the walk, the Salisbury Trench enclosure that was established way back in 1700, just after the New Forest Act of 1698, which I think was the first New Forest Act to permit the fencing in of large areas of land to produce timber for the Royal Navy. So it was thrown out at some stage, i.e. the wooden fencing would have been taken down off the enclosure banks, but then re-enclosed, the fencing put back up in 1899. There are not so many ancient trees in this enclosure, so it might have been cleared of timber at some stage. Now, a lot of oak was planted between the two world wars at a time when the authorities were concentrating more on conifers, so large-scale oak planting in that period was quite rare. As to why it's called Salisbury Trench, well, if you look back at maps in the 16th century, there were areas around here called South Trench and Middle Trench, and well, the fact that the Salisbury Road isn't far from here to the east might have something to do with it. I'm not sure. Well, I just had to stop and check this one out. Another quite enchanting little stream with little natural waterfalls. And the water looks so fresh and clear. You could just sit and stand by this and watch it for ages, couldn't you? Well, very much on the homeward leg now. Just got to follow this track back to the car. But our walk isn't finished just yet. We're not that far from Fritham and the Royal Oak. We really ought to check that one out, just for research purposes for the video, of course. Well, just before we get into the car, a little bit of footage for some New Forest ponies for you. A gelding walking away on the right there. Of course, they've all got their winter coats on. They should be nice and cosy for the winter. I was mentioning earlier on when I was at the pony pound telling you about the reflective collars. You'll notice that this one here on the left has got a reflective collar round the neck, and it just protects it if it goes near the road at night. And they're held on by Velcro, so just in case it gets caught up in branches, it can release. It was a good idea. Well, our final destination, folks, the Royal Oak at Fritham, one of the oldest pubs in the forest, and more importantly, one of my favourites. Well, folks, we've come to the end of our walk. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do give us a thumbs up and a like, and do leave a comment, and do check out my Facebook page, Dave's Countryside Walks. We've had a super walk today, and the weather, well, the autumn sunshine has been quite glorious. And what a super place to end at the Royal Oak at Fritham with a pint of double flax. Oh yes. So until we meet again, thanks for watching, and cheerio. Oh, sorry, I almost forgot. Silly me.